Where am I? Who am I? That's from okay,
Monday.
318. Oh, Monday. That explains that.
No, it's a 350. Oh, the pie. The pie?
Like right there at Admiral. Thank you.
Another option for it if you just want to play a piece. All right, page 318, complex harmonic progression. I talked about the fact that if you, he's listed 6 rather simple compositional devices. In other words, a single idea that you might have to make your piece more interesting, like a harmonic sequence, or change of mode, or a chromatic mode. But if you combine any 2 of them, it makes the music appear extremely complex, more complex than 2 ideas at the same time. But you don't really realize how complex it makes it look till you try to analyze something. Because it just doesn't make any sense when you try to analyze it, unless you can figure out what the 2 different ideas that are put together are. Trying to think of an analogy. 2 frequencies interacting with each other. Have you ever seen waveforms when you take 2 frequencies and you add them together? They make really interesting jagged lines. So you get waveforms that have these very interesting jagged lines. So when you're trying to figure out, well, why is it up over, this would be loud and this would be soft and this would be over time. An instrument playing this, violin, trumpet have very complex looking waveforms. But when the synthesizer was invented at Bell Telephone Laboratories, do you know the story of how the synthesizer was invented? Okay, once was a time Bell Telephone was the only telephone company in the United States. I even remember this as a child. We had one telephone company. If you didn't like it, too bad. Back then, a cell phone was putting a phone in a prison cell, which didn't make any sense at all. But now it seems to mean something completely different. So Bell Telephone had tons of money because they were the only phone company in town. So they spent lots and lots of their money on research to try to make phones better. Makes sense. So they hired scientists to make sound better going through wires. So the first thing the scientists did, this is the 1920s and 30s. First thing the scientists did was say, well, if we're going to improve sound, first we have to define what is sound and how is it even made. So by the 1930s, their scientists decided to create an artificial sound. And in creating an artificial sound, they wanted to learn how sound was made. And that way you could figure out how to move it on a wire better. Make sense? So they looked for a complex sound because they thought if we could create a complex sound, then the non-complex sounds would be easy, like the human voice coming across the line. So they set out to make a musical sound. They set out to artificially make the sound of a trumpet. So they had to study, what's the waveform of a trumpet and how's the sound produced? The lips are kind of flapping in a mouthpiece, and they did years and years of research, and they, by the late 1940s, they created, with electronics and tubes about the size of this room, filled with wires and tubes, they created what sounded like, when they played it through a speaker, it sounded like a trumpet being played, a recording of a trumpet being played through a speaker. So they went to all the trouble to study all these waveforms. Well, of course, they saw this complex waveform, and they were trying to make a complex waveform. Fast forward to about 1970s, synthesizers are starting to be commonplace. companies like Yamaha are making different synthesizers, and they're studying how to make these complex waveforms. And they go, it's not as hard as we thought. We don't need an algorithm with a complexity. We need a bunch of simple waveforms that can be combined. And once you take two and combine two of them, you get this complex looking thing. So the Yamaha DX7, which was one of the first affordable $2,000 synthesizers, it had 6 wave algorithms that could be combined any way that you wanted. So you could take a smooth sine wave like a flute, or a block wave like a trumpet or a trombone, or a square wave like a violin. But you could combine all these different waves. And what they found was amazing. They went, we took these really simple things that don't really sound like a real instrument. They just sound like but you put 2 or 3 of them together and all of a sudden people are saying, oh, that's a harp. And it really sounded like stuff. And they're going, well, maybe it's not as hard as we thought. And in fact, it wasn't. The hard part was knowing what to combine. But simple waveforms combined made these complex sounding things. So you're writing a piece and you decide to take 2 different ideas that make chromaticism, but you do them at the same time, or you overlap them or something. What the person trying to analyze it with will just look at it and scratch their head and go, what are we doing with the B minor triad in the key of C? It doesn't make any sense. And the only thing you can really do with complex ideas like this, more than one, is you look at it, you stare at it, you think about it a while. If you have time, you sleep on it, you look at it again, and hopefully you get some kind of an insight. It's a kind of, well, let's could it be part like this or part like that? And you kind of stumble upon it. So it's always like Einstein and relativity. So who would have thought of combining time and space as a single interlocked element? It didn't, you know. But somehow he stumbled on this and he said, well, what if time and space were locked together? You couldn't separate them. That would explain why, if you're going the speed of light, something's thrown like this, the thing that's thrown can't go faster than this. Whereas if you're driving a car at 60 miles an hour and you throw a baseball forward at 10, the baseball's going 70. So he just kept doing this problem over and over again, and he just experimented with what if time and space are these 2 simple ideas, time and space, and they're linked like this, and they make this complex relativity to the atomic theory. So there is some good news for you. I can't give you this on a test because this isn't the kind of thing you can get tested on in 30 minutes or even 50 minutes. You really need time to kind of look at it, think about it. It's like you're looking for a cure for cancer or something. You just have to try all these different things and then maybe you'll stumble upon it. But I always think it's too much pressure to give somebody this and say, okay, you have 50 minutes of it. Maybe a doctor will let you. Yeah, I was given stuff like that. I had to find it. But that, okay, by the time you're working on a doctor, you've seen stuff like this a lot, and you're really good at putting simple things together. But we're just looking at it. Yeah.
What percentage, could you come up with a percentage of music that is like this? Is it like infinitesimal?
It's a small
Do you know that
percentage.
word? Maybe it's really tiny.
It's a small infant. A very tiny infant. It's infinitesimal. No, it's, I don't know if I'd say infinitesimal, but it's a very small percent.
Under 1%?
Oh,
Or maybe like 1 or 2%?
let's see.
And a lot of the greats did this stuff?
It was very experimental because it ended up with some really complex stuff. And for the most part, I will tell you that when you do this, your audience won't like it. Because it's almost as if the audience can't even subliminally pick up what you're doing. I'll give you an example in a couple of pages where Mozart did it with the string quartet. And they gave it the nickname, the dissonant quartet.
Nice.
And the example of Bach doing it, most people don't like the particular Bach piece that he did. They say, well, it just sounds weird to me. You'd almost have to analyze it and then listen to it